Assalamu alaikum. Hello, boys and girls in grade 9. This is a grammar lesson. It's from the Grammar for Writing book for grade 9. It's a Sadlier book, 2014, a wonderful book. Today we will explain the first lesson from chapter 8 on clauses. So let's take a quick look at the whole chapter before we kick a start, so that you know what is going to be covered in the coming few classes, and then we'll go back to lesson 8.1 to explain it in detail. So as usual, the book starts with student writing. You can read this in your own time. And then lesson 8.1 is what we're going to explain today. It's about independent clauses and subordinate clauses, as they call it here, or dependent clauses. Many of you know those clauses by this name. This is the lesson we're going to explain today. In the coming lesson, we will talk about adjective clauses, and then the lesson after, we will talk about adverb clauses. As you know, or as you've noticed, each lesson is followed by a page full of exercises, usually no more than that. And then we will talk about noun clauses, and we will talk about the 4 types of sentence structures. There will be lesson 8.5, so 5 lessons are in this chapter. And after that, we will have a couple of lessons on revising and editing. And then we will have a chapter review, and we're done with the unit. So let's start lesson 8.1, which is on clauses. So what are independent clauses and subordinate clauses? Every clause is either independent or dependent or subordinate. An independent or main clause has a subject and a verb and expresses a main thought. Does this definition sound familiar? It should, because it's also the definition for a sentence. An independent clause can stand alone as a sentence, and that's why we call it an independent clause. It doesn't need anybody. So let's take an example. Karen and John are late as usual. That's very bad, Karen and John. So this is an independent clause because it has a subject, Karen and John. Subject is a compound subject, and then we have a verb, and if you read the sentence, makes sense. So this is an independent or a main clause. Now this is a simple sentence actually. A compound sentence is made up of 2 or more independent clauses, or 2 or more kind of simple sentences, but you cannot really say a compound sentence consists of 2 sentences. You have to say a compound sentence consists of 2, what do we call them? Clauses. So compound sentence is made up of 2 or more independent clauses joined by a... Why didn't I read this word? Because I need something that I taught you before. If you're my students, or if you are SAT students in general, you know the fanboys. So a compound sentence is made up of 2 or more independent clauses joined by one of the fanboys. The conjunctions called the fanboys. So what are the fanboys? For, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so 7 of them, fanboys. The second example, we finished the jigsaw puzzle, but 2 pieces were missing. So this is a compound sentence, and it has 2 independent clauses. Why do we call them independent clauses? Because if you put a full stop here, right, and you read them separately, if you replace this comma by a full stop and you read them separately, then they will be absolutely fine, flawless sentences. We finished the jigsaw puzzle, full stop, but 2 pieces were missing, full stop, absolutely fine. So A compound sentence has two independent clauses. Now, how about a subordinate or a dependent clause? It has a subject and a verb, just like, yes, just like an independent clause. But look at the third condition. So has a subject is the first condition, as a verb is the second condition, and expresses a complete thought is the third condition for an independent clause. How about the subordinate clause? It has a subject, right? Somebody's calling. And it has a verb, but it does not express a complete thought. So that's the difference between the two. That let's take an example. The first example is that I told you about. Now, do we have a subject? Yes, I. Here it is. And do we have a verb? Yeah, here it is. But does it make sense if you say that I told you about? There's a problem with the word that being in a sentence. Let's take another example, and then we'll fix these two examples later on in the lesson. Because she's trying to save money. Yes. Then what? Because she's trying to save money, what happened? So we have a subject, yes, she. Do we have a verb? Yes, which is. Do we have a complete meaning? No, because we have the word because. So the word because makes the sentence problematic, just as the word that does. So a subordinate clause cannot stand alone. It must be attached to or inserted into an independent clause, or the word that makes it a subordinate clause must be left out. What does that mean? Let's see. Let's take this one first and let's read it. Because she's trying to save money, just like this, but he would put a comma. Sheila has been packing her lunch, not really buying anything from a canteen. So because she's trying to save money, we put this subordinate clause. It's called the subordinate clause because it needs another clause to explain it. And here is the other clause that explains that, the independent clause. So this is the dependent clause or the subordinate clause. And this is the independent clause. It's called the independent clause because it makes sense by itself. This one doesn't. So how did we solve the problem of this sentence not making sense? By making it part of another sentence. It must be attached to or inserted into an independent clause. See? So here it's attached to an independent clause. It's attached to it, and both of them are linked using a comma because the word because comes at the beginning of the sentence. Okay, how about this one, this fragment that I told you about? How about this one? Yeah, the house that I told you about sold this morning. Here what we did is the subordinate clause was inserted into an independent clause. So if we read this sentence without our problematic fragment here, it will be the house sold this morning. So it's an absolutely fine sentence. It's an independent clause. So we took this here and we put it or inserted it into an independent clause, and then it became meaningful and it became a good boy or a good girl in a sentence. The house that I told you about sold this morning. So that I told you about by itself doesn't make sense, but if you put it or insert it, the subordinate clause has been inserted into an independent clause, then it makes sense. So let's take a look at this here. That my picture will be on here on the right side, so I'll try to open this here so that you don't get distracted by my lovely picture. All right, so editing tip. Remember that a subordinate clause can't stand alone. When it does, it's a clause fragment. So it's a fragment because it cannot stand alone and needs to be corrected. And we studied this before, how to correct a sentence fragment. So for example, helium is lighter than air. And we have the word because. So just drop it out and you will get an absolutely perfect sentence. Or you need to attach it to something else. This is what we have just talked about here. So this is the editing tip that they're talking about here. Okay, now this talking tip, I don't want to cram too much in this lesson. It's already 11 minutes now, so I'll skip this tip. It's not really all that important. Let me summarize the lesson for you real quick here. This lesson is about independent clauses and subordinate clauses. And independent clause or main clause has three things. It has subject, verb, and a complete thought. And we took an example. Then we talked about a subordinate clause or a dependent clause, and it has a subject, a verb, but it does not express a complete thought. And we saw how we can fix it. And there are other ways, of course, that we studied before, but this lesson here will help you a whole lot when we come to the other 4 lessons in this chapter. Hopefully, the lesson was beneficial and enjoyable. Thank you very much for watching, and bye.